Hey, this is Ryan with TrendLizard.com. We're going to take a look at a few ETFs today, a few stocks today, three different tickers, starting with Coca-Cola, ticker KO. It has more data than our charts go back to, so our data goes back to 1980, so we're starting there. It's pretty clear what happened back then. It was a massive uptrend into the 1998 high, at which point it pulled back for a decade or so before it found a low and resumed its uptrend. So on a very long-term time frame, KO is very bullish. It continues to point higher overall. The only thing it's ever done on a long-term time frame is give us trendy up moves and counter-trend pullbacks. So that's obviously a formula for continued strength, and that's about as straightforward as it gets. As we dive in, it gets a little bit more confusing and convoluted, but we're going to do our best to make sense of it. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. This looks at the advance off the 2009 low. If we go back to this chart, it's basically the resumption of the long-term uptrend at this point after a decade-long pullback. So that's where we're looking at here. When we look at it, there's a few different ways that you can label this. It gets a little bit difficult here because every time it sets a high, it moves to a new high, it pulls back, moves to a new high, and then does what we call overlap by coming back below this high. So you can see these lines that I've drawn here. Every time it breaks out to a new high, it comes back and it overlaps, which makes it a little bit more difficult to get a grip on exactly where we are. You can see if you look back at some of these earlier highs like this one here, if you were to draw a line, after it breaks out, it never comes back below that high. So that was the case early on in this move. Ever since about 2012, every time a new high is set, it turns back, overlaps, so it makes it a little bit difficult to figure out exactly where we are. That said, it does look like it's possible for this up leg to have completed. There's nothing rock solid that says it has, but it looks possible, and that gives me a little bit of pause, and I'll show you why as we dive in. So let's zoom in a little bit more here. This looks at the last up leg. This is essentially this up leg here followed by the pullback. So here's the up leg, looks like a nice five-wave move, and then the breakdown occurred in 2018. So this is a pretty impressive breakdown here, this down leg early in January and I think February as well. Since then, the recovery effort was weak, a counter-trend move, and it's since turned back down again. So this looks like it has the potential to break down. I mean, it's retraced more than 61.8% of this up leg, which is one warning sign of maybe a bigger reversal in trend, but also just the nature of this pattern here, the sharp decline followed by a choppy recovery and now breaking down again. Seems like the door is open for it to continue to weaken from here. So one thing that you would notice as this advance has gone, it never sets a lower low. So I think one of the biggest cues that this entire up leg has advanced is that a lower low would be set below 38. If that's what happens, I would certainly want nothing to do with Coke. I think it would be an indication that this up leg has completed and a much larger pullback has begun. So that would be the biggest warning signs. As far as maybe reversing its fortune and finding a way to continue higher, it would need a move above 45.70. So that would indicate that this pullback off the 2018 high is actually a counter trend move and that it has intentions on continuing higher. Obviously on this guy, that's a fairly substantial move. Maybe 7 or 8% before it does that, but still that's what we're looking at. I think as is on any kind of shorter time frame, whether you're talking short term or midterm, it doesn't really look like the type of pattern you'd want to own just because it's broken down. It hasn't been able to recover. It looks like it wants to head lower from here. So I wouldn't want anything to do with it on any kind of shorter time frame unless it's able to recover, give us something trendy to the upside, or even better, move above 45.70 to indicate that its fortunes had reversed. Otherwise, once again, if it sets a lower low below 38, I think that opens the door to a much bigger pullback and certainly wouldn't be anything that you'd want to own at that time. So I hope that's helpful. We'll get to the next one in a minute. Thanks.